I'm Hal Meng with the Center for Food Preservation Arts, and welcome to the third episode of our series on home food preservation that we are producing in collaboration with Food is Free Tacoma and their Food Independence Garden program. We're going to be continuing tonight to explore pickling and going into a technique we haven't brought into the series yet, short brining. Now, as you probably know, pickling works to preserve foods by creating an acidic environment that makes it hard for bacteria to reproduce and grow. And there are a couple of techniques for producing this environment. One of the most common is referred to often as quick pickling, where you add vinegar of 5% in usually a 50-50 ratio of the vinegar to water. And the other is a process of fermentation, which uses a very strongly salt solution to kill the bad bacteria and allow the good ones that create lactic acid to develop. Now, we're going to be doing an entire program on fermentation as the last in this series, making some sauerkraut. So tonight we're going to be focusing on a couple of different methods of making the quick vinegar added pickles. So the methods are very simple and they're self-descriptive. One is a refrigerator pickle, and the second is a canned pickle. And the canned pickles are shelf stable because we're utilizing a water bath canner. And the refrigerator pickles are kept safe for at least a week in the refrigerator by keeping the temperature at 40 degrees or less. The recipe that we've picked tonight, we're going to be using zucchini instead of cucumbers, because a lot of people don't know that zucchini makes a great substitute for cucumbers when pickling cucumbers are out of season. So it's a very simple recipe with just 3 basic ingredients, some spices, and of course vinegar. The zucchini, red peppers, and onions. And all of it is diced very thinly and very small, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. I'm going to share just a couple of techniques and maybe tricks that you're probably familiar with. But with the zucchini, the best zucchini would be to get them when they're small. So the diameter is less than 1.5 inches. When you get them that small, basically the seeds are not very big. And so you don't run into any of the bitterness, and you also don't have any toughness with them. And you just want to do a very small dice. And we'll take care of that in a moment. The second ingredient will be the red peppers. And this is a technique I just learned a while ago as an easy way to deal with the seeds. You want to take and make a cut so that you're avoiding the seeds and the white stem. So that one was a little close. But then when you've got the pieces, you go ahead and clean up any of those white ribs that are there. And then go ahead and do your dice. And so I'm going to go ahead and move these things out of the way and show you my favorite technique for dicing onions. Now, there's a lot of information within this program and a lot of background that you can go with it. So I encourage you to follow the link that's in the description we have a whole collection of resources, recipes, hacks, techniques, including a video that demonstrates not only the onion dicing technique I'm going to do right now, but also will give you 2 other alternative techniques. So this one is the standard one that's often recommended by a lot of professional chef training programs. And it's basically just the 3 cuts. Now, what I like to do is go ahead and make the first cut through. And every once in a while you get something in the way. And then going ahead and making the vertical cuts. And you'll notice we left the root of the onion on. And that will keep it together, and that makes it much easier to go ahead and make your cuts. And so then there is the technique of the short brine. And I went ahead and prepared the vegetables that we're going to need. And basically, if you see the salt that's in the recipe, we don't add any additional salt. We just take the vegetables and mix them with salt, cover them with water, and then allow them to sit in the refrigerator for anywhere from 2 to 24 hours. What this does, this short brining process, is it doesn't break down the texture a lot. The texture is still good, but it's drawn a lot of the water out. And so when you start to heat it with the vinegar and water and the spices, it has room now inside to pull that vinegar and those spice flavors all the way back in. So we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and we'll drain the vegetables. And while they're draining, we'll go ahead and make the brine. And I should point out that the term brine can be very confusing because it can be both a noun and a verb. So this process that I just described, brining, is a process, and the short brining, when we're making any fermented product, it's a long brine where there's not any vinegar added, but there's a huge amount of salt, as I mentioned, to kill the bad bacteria. But then brine can also be a pickling brine, which indicates that it's going to have vinegar in it. In this particular case, it's going to have a lot of sugar to offset that sourness a little bit because it's straight vinegar, so it's a 100% vinegar. And that's usually most common when you're making refrigerator pickles, as opposed to the 50-50. And then this is a mixture of celery seed and mustard seed. And then we're going to go ahead and let that come up to a boil. And let it boil for a bit, as in the recipe. And then we'll be adding the vegetables in. So we've brought this brine mixture of the vinegar and the spices and the sugar to a boil for a few minutes. And then we add the short brined vegetables. And you can see already that it's going to be a very colorful relish. Now, I mentioned at this point that it is possible to change out some of the spices and add other spices. And we'll do a whole conversation on that sometime in the near future. But the one thing you want to be sure and remember to do is always use a tested recipe. And if you're swapping out spices, only swap out dried spices. Don't start adding fresh herbs unless the recipe calls for it, because that will change the balance of the non-acidic vegetables to the acid and can make it a little bit less safe of a recipe. And so now we bring this back to a full boil and let it boil for 10 minutes before we jar it. All right, so this has been cooking for about 10 minutes. And you can see that it's retained a lot of its color. And so just like we did with the giornata, the recipe last time, we go ahead and fill it up. So we've got about a ½ inch of head space between the top and the vegetables. And then after it's filled, they're all filled, we'll put the liquid in and bring it to about the same level. And then we'll go ahead and get some liquid in there. Topping it off. And wiping the rims. And the lids, just briefly for about 30 to 45 seconds. But you can see how nice a color this is. And certainly you wouldn't have to use just red peppers. You could use orange and yellow. There are a lot of other recipes out there that have different vegetables mixed in. But one thing that I want to try later this summer when my zucchini come in is basically cutting them into spears and then using them like I would dill pickles. So the rims all nice and clean. Grab the rings and just finger tight. And so the nice thing about this particular recipe that you can do it either as shelf stable or refrigerator is that you wouldn't have to do a huge batch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to process 2 of them to put on the shelf and take the other one to be a refrigerator eat within the next week or so. And so as with all water bath canning, we want to bring this up to a full boil. And in this particular instance, it's a 10-minute at a full boil processing time and then a 5-minute stand. And so we've had the full processing time of 10 minutes. And we've had the 5-minute stand. And so these 2 jars are going to be shelf stable and will be stored for future use. And then this one is going to be eaten within a week. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me today for this class. And the next episode will be in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be making strawberry rhubarb jam. Two things that we have in plentiful supply coming up at this time of year. And we're also going to be introducing the use of special pectins, and we're using the brand, the Pomona's Universal Pectin, that allows you to completely control the amount of sweeteners and sugar that you use. So enjoy, everyone, and we'll see you next time.